Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Thunderstruck. As always, my name is Jake Ricker, and alongside me is my good friend and co-host Michael Wax. And Michael, today we have a very, very special guest. He's been in the radio play-by-play announcer for both the Johnstown Chiefs hockey team and the Hershey Bears, and of course for your Tampa Bay Lightning for over the past 22 years. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Dave Mishkin. Dave, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and joining us here today.
Of course. Good to be with you guys.
So, Dave, we kind of want to start from the beginning for people who may not, if they're Lightning fans, I know they know you, but for those who maybe don't, just want to start at the beginning. How did you first get into wanting to be a play-by-play announcer?
Well, I started in college and I did it as an extracurricular activity. I didn't take any courses for broadcasting or anything like that. But, I went to Yale as an undergrad, and they had a college radio station, mostly music, but they had a sports department. And I got involved my sophomore year, and they did the sports in terms of having coverage, doing play-by-play, but really the show that was on the most was a talk show. It was on Monday through Friday, and you could have more than one or two people on a show, right? So they really encouraged, the new people to get involved in the show as a way to cut your teeth in terms of just being on the air and being comfortable speaking in front of a microphone. So my sophomore year, I did a lot of that, and then I did what was known as dummy broadcasts, where I would actually take a recording device. In those days, it was a cassette player, right? Going back a few years, and I'd go to the games and practice doing the play-by-play into the tape recorder, and then I'd have a record of the play-by-play, and I shared it with some of the upperclassmen. They'd give me feedback, and I got into a couple of games as doing the work as an analyst my sophomore year, but it was really as a junior. A lot of the seniors that were running the sports department graduated when I was a sophomore. We didn't have a lot of juniors that year. So when I became a junior, a fellow junior and I kind of became sports directors. And so I did a lot of games my junior and senior years. I was really the only one interested in doing hockey. The hockey was high level hockey. Yale did and still does play in Division I. Their team wasn't very good during my time there, but the caliber of the play was very high. So I got a lot of experience doing play-by-play, even though I didn't take one class toward that end. And it was during that time I decided I wanted to try and pursue it and see if I could get a job broadcasting in the minor leagues. And at that time, below the NHL, you had the AHL, which you still have, the IHL, which was the International Hockey League. That was kind of a sister league to the AHL. They had some NHL affiliates, but it was more like an older player league for the players that had been in the NHL and were no longer in the NHL. It was a place for them to go and further their careers. And then kind of the equivalent of AA, because the AHL and IHL were kind of like AAA, was the ECHL, the East Coast Hockey League, and it was there that I got my first job in Johnstown, which you referenced. So I did 3 years in Johnstown, and from probably 55 to 60 games total in college, I jumped to 76, I think, that first year in Johnstown alone. So I got a lot of reps, I got a lot of experience, and after 3 years, I got a job in Hershey, which was and still is in the American Hockey League, and I was there for 8 years. So I spent 11 years in the minors, not including the time I spent broadcasting in college, and had amassed about 1,000 games of experience before the Lightning job opened, and I got the opportunity to join the Lightning in 2002. So that was a long answer.
Before we get to how you jumped from the AHL to the NHL, I wanted to ask about just scheduling. So when you're much like a player, you go from college hockey where they play 30 or so games to potentially professionals, which are playing 60, 70, 80 games. What does that jump for a broadcaster look like?
Well, it wasn't only the broadcasting. So, when you're in college, you're going to class, right? I mean, you have other stuff that's happening that requires your attention. And I mean, I didn't only do hockey in college. I did football. I did some basketball, baseball. There wasn't a lot to do. I mean, Yale does have a baseball team. There have been some major leaguers who have played for Yale. We didn't do as many of those games, maybe a handful. But at the minor league level, in most instances, Michael, the broadcaster is doing lots of jobs. So when I got hired by the Johnstown Chiefs, I wasn't just doing the play-by-play. I was also doing sales. I was doing PR. I was doing promotions. It's the minor leagues. You have a small staff. So it's probably it's less about the jump from college to pro, and for a player, that is a significant jump because they're used to playing maybe 30 to 35 games, like you said, and now their body is just going through a much different experience. Also, the season is longer.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, yeah, I called more games, but it was more about the transition from being a student to being a full-time worker, right?
Yeah.
And the minor leagues, at least if you're going to wear all those hats, like, it is a grind. You have to really love it because you're working strange hours during the season, especially. You know, we would typically have 3 games and 3 nights. This was true with Johnstown and Hershey, the way the schedule worked out. A lot of Friday road games, then a lot of Saturday home games, and then Sunday was like a pick-em. Sometimes it was home, sometimes it was road. So, you know, you'd get back from the Friday night game maybe at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And if you're the home team for Saturday, like, I was responsible for getting all of the stats together, right? Because that was part of the job too, which helped the broadcasting, but it was part of the job requirement. So I remember there was many a night where the bus would roll back into the arena at, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd just sleep on a sofa in the office and then get up at, 8 or something to get the work done for the game that night. And then you got to call the game, right? So it's that kind of a grind. It's not so much that there were a lot of games. I think the quantity of games helps because you're getting more reps. It was about managing all of the other things that are required in addition to the broadcasting, which your employer wants you to do a good job broadcasting, but the employer is also pretty concerned that, the PR stuff is taken care of and you're making your sales to bring in the revenue and you're handling the player promotions. So all of it was important. And I think that it was a great experience to kind of dip your toe, or maybe more than your toe, into all these different areas to gain experience. That was the jump. It wasn't so much the number of games, it was the lifestyle and what came with the job of being a minor league broadcaster, at least in the early 90s. Now it's a little different. And again, I haven't been in the minors for, over 20 years, but it's not so much PR. I think that's part of it. But I think that the broadcasters now really have to be tied into the social media component. And I mean, just as a point of comparison, like, the Lightning have their own social media department that is now like 4 or 5 people, who are running this. Again, it's on a bigger scale, but at the minor league level, again, you're one person and you're probably expected to do lots of different jobs. That didn't exist when I was in the minors, obviously.
No, you're 100% right. I'm currently broadcasting for the St. Lucie Mets, the Mets minor league affiliate, and I do the a lot of the broadcasting and the social media, just like you were talking about. So there's a lot of that multi hats. I always said it's funny. Sometimes you kind of, as you move up in the ranks of broadcasting, you almost do a little bit less. You have more people that are helping you out and doing other things. It's a very different experience from a traditional job. But I want to talk about that jump once you made it. You're with the Bears. And then you move to the NHL. How did you mention that opportunity became available? How did that kind of that situation come about when you got your job with the Lightning?
So most broadcasters who are in the AHL, probably all broadcasters in the AHL, could do NHL games. It's not a lack of ability, it's opportunity. So, excuse me, in the 8 years that I was in Hershey, like, there were NHL jobs that opened and I put my hat in the ring and didn't get it. There were other people who got it, and like, why are these other people getting it? Well, it's a subjective business, first of all. So some demos speak to a listener or a viewer more than others, and that just comes with the territory. But a lot of it is, if you're a director of broadcasting at the NHL level and you're making this decision, you want to make sure it's the right decision. You don't want to have to go back a year later and then hire somebody else, right? So how can you ensure best you can that this is going to be the right decision? Well, part of it is, do you like the demo? And if that box is checked, great. But there are probably going to be a lot of demos that are just fine. So what does it come down to? Well, you can talk to people who know that person and try and ensure best you can that they are going to be a good fit, or maybe you know that person, right? As the person making the hire. And it's not really like you hear that and people might say, well, he's talking about the old boy network. I mean, it's a small circle, but I don't think that there's anything like untoward about it. What it means is that you're having people vouch for the fact that you're going to be a team player, you're going to show up on time, your work habits are right in line with what the organization wants. And I think that that's true in any industry when a hire is being made. I think in the hockey world, when it comes to, let's say, hiring a broadcaster, you have a smaller pool of top candidates. And usually you can talk to somebody who has either worked with that person or been a boss to that person. So in my case, Jay Feaster hired me in Hershey in 1994. He was the general manager with the Bears. We worked together there for 4 years. He was my boss there for 4 years. And then he moved up, like players move up, like coaches move up, like broadcasters move up, managers can move up. So Jay was hired to be the assistant general manager with the Lightning in 1998, but we stayed in touch through that time. And by 2002, he was the GM. He had been promoted to GM in February of that year. So that summer, he calls me and he says, get your stuff ready. John Ollers, who was my predecessor with the Lightning on radio, ended up getting the job doing TV with Anaheim. So he was up for that job. And Jay Feaster said, John Ollers is up for the Anaheim TV job, and I think he's going to get it. So get your stuff ready. So the GM hires the broadcaster usually at the minor league level. At the NHL level, the GM doesn't hire the broadcaster. They have like a business side to do it. But I will tell you that when the general manager hand delivers your demo to the person making the hire, in this case it was Jason Dixon, who was our director of broadcasting, like that carries some weight. But why did Jay do that? Like, we worked together for 4 years. Yeah, he hired me, but if he had felt that was the wrong hire, I might not have lasted the 4 years that we worked together. But he felt confident that, like, I worked out really well for him in Hershey, and he felt that I would work out really well with the Lightning. So that's kind of where it falls in terms of, like, having somebody be an advocate for you. That's really what it's about, and that often can get you across the finish line. It doesn't always happen that way. I mean, some broadcasters apply for jobs, and the person doing the hiring just absolutely falls in love with their demo, and they're like, that's the person. I want that person. Usually, though, there's some other elements that have to fall into place, and for me, I mean, I didn't know the Lightning job was going to open. John Ollers might have stayed in this position for years and years and years. Like, I've been in the position for 22 years, right? But it was kind of like the stars aligned for me. But I had to be in the right position to take advantage of that, essentially. So I got the job.
So I know we already talked about your scheduling and moving from college to the ECHL to the AHL. Getting to the NHL in 02, the Lightning were a pretty good team, and they would become an even better team, winning the Stanley Cup just a few years later. What goes into maybe not the preparation for changing for a good versus a bad team, but what goes into your style of calls for a top-ranked team versus maybe a team that's struggling a little bit?
Nothing. I mean, honestly. I mean, even the best teams over an 82-game regular season are going to have clunkers. And even the worst teams over an 82 game season are probably going to have some pretty good games. I think you just call the game the way you call the game. Maybe internally, like your own expectations about what am I going to see here might affect it, but I've always just tried to react to what I am seeing. And I'll make a small correction there. When I arrived in 02, the Lightning had been in the league for 10 years. They only made the playoffs once. So expectations were fairly low, I think, for that first season that I arrived, 02-03. And I think that they caught a lot of teams by surprise. They won their division. They beat the Capitals in the first round of the playoffs. But really, even though they were the higher seed, it was an upset. I mean, the Caps were a way more experienced, seasoned playoff team than the Lightning were. And so they won a series for the first time in franchise history. And I just happened to like parachute in just as this ascension happened. Then, of course, the next year they won the Stanley Cup. But I've also had seasons in which the Lightning have not done well at all. I mean, fortunately for me and kind of for fans of the Lightning, those have been fewer. But, you know, there's a reason why they drafted Steven Stamkos first overall. They drafted Steven Stamkos first overall because they had the worst record in the league, right? There's a reason why they got Victor Hedman second overall the next year. They had the second worst record in the league. So there have been some lean years in there too, but it hasn't, I try not to let it affect kind of how I go about my business of calling the play-by-play. What I actually thought you were going to ask is what was the adjustment from the AHL to the NHL just in terms of calling games? Because, Jake, you're right. Like, I don't have as many responsibilities in the NHL and haven't had as many as I had in the AHL or the ECHL. But the responsibilities I do have, like there's an expectation that you perform at a major league level, right? So there's that. But what I found was, so the game is faster at the NHL level than at the AHL level, and the AHL game is faster than it is at the ECHL level. And the game at the ECHL level is faster than it is at the college level. But these are marginal increases. So the pace of play is quicker. To keep up with the play requires a little bit more like dexterity, but it's not a huge jump, at least in terms of calling the play-by-play. And I think I really benefited from having those, whatever it was, 1,000 games in the minors. If you would drop me in an NHL press box after 10 games in the minors, I would have been swimming upstream for sure. So the biggest difference is the game was faster at the NHL level, and you're farther from the ice, pretty much across the board. So the players become more difficult to see. On the other hand, the amount of turnover at the NHL level is way, way less than it is at the minor league level. So there may be turnover from team to team, but there is less turnover from player to player. And what I mean by that is, like to use the Lightning as an example, you know, Jake Gensel is new to the Lightning, but he's not new to the NHL. So if one of my fellow broadcasters is, you know, going to be coming in and calling a Lightning game, they might be like, all right, well, Jake Gensel is new to the Lightning, but I've seen Jake Gensel play in the NHL for whatever, 7-8 years. So it's not like some new player that you've never seen before. So I think there's a level of familiarity with whatever you want to say, 75% of the league. I don't have the exact numbers, but whatever the ratio is or percentage of actually new players, like the Connor Geekies in the NHL this year, that is a fairly small number. And when you're looking at just one team to prepare for on a particular night, how many actual new players to the league that like I've never seen before might they have? 2, 3 maybe of their roster of 18 skaters and 2 goalies. So in terms of like identifying the players, you are farther from the ice, but I think there's more familiarity right off the bat with who's playing on the other team. And of course the Lightning guys. I know.
For the Lightning guys, I know you mentioned like Connor Geeky, for example, a new face that we haven't seen at the NHL level. Last year, I want to say there were 8 debuts. Like what was the prep that went into having to prepare for 8 new guys throughout the course of the season?
So it would have been harder for the broadcaster in the other booth than for me. And the reason for that is that we do the preseason games.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually probably more of the heavy lift. But on the other hand, the last, whatever it's been, I don't even know how many years it's been. The Lightning played the same 3 teams in the preseason, basically every preseason: Carolina, Nashville, and Florida. So even if there's a player that's just been drafted by Carolina, let's say, who's a couple of years away from even turning pro, maybe I've seen that player in a preseason game. And then the next preseason, I'm seeing that player again, even though he's going back to his amateur team. For the Lightning guys, not only am I seeing them in camp, not only am I seeing them in the preseason, a lot of them I've seen in the July camp, which happens in Brandon, where there's a 3-on-3 tournament that often I'm calling that. So I have more of a runway where, like, I've certainly seen the players. A lot of them, I've gotten pronunciations on. So, like, I've said their name before. Like, there's this guy who's in Syracuse this year, Gabriel Stutz. His last name does not look like it would be pronounced Stutz, right? It's got all these, like, consonants in it. There's a couple of Z's in there, right? So the Lightning signed this guy this year, but he was actually in camp last year. They invited him. And he was still a junior player. Like, he went back to his junior team. He played in the Western Hockey League. But I remember, like, going to him in the locker room during the July camp and asking him how he said his name. So I actually got that well before he ever, like, signed a contract with the Lightning. It doesn't always play out that way. But I remembered Stutz from training camp 2023. And then the next year, I'm like, oh, they signed this guy. Like, he has a contract now. And he played in like 3 of the 6 preseason games this year. So, like, let's say he comes up. Like, I'm pretty familiar with this guy. I just use him as an example. But the same was true with Lilleberg, who played in the preseason last year, Crozier, who played in the preseason last year, Declan Carlisle, who played in the preseason last year. All these guys came up. I mean, Lilleberg and Crozier ended up staying. Carlisle came up, played 1 game, and went back down. But there was familiarity there because I'd seen them before.
Oh, big thing when I took a lot of broadcasting classes, and they always talk about finding a broadcaster's voice. And you are known for your very passionate calls, which I know me and a lot of other Lightning fans have always really enjoyed. So I wanted to ask you about, how did you find your voice when it came to those special goal calls?
So when I started, backing up again to my college radio days, I kind of asked myself a question, and this is on radio. There's no visual to accompany it. I said, like, well, what do I want the play-by-play to sound like? And I kind of based it on play-by-play announcers that I liked listening to. So I kind of came away with 2 kind of foundational bedrock philosophies about how I wanted to call a game. And one of those was that I was going to be really descriptive. So on radio, you can be more descriptive. You can be a little less descriptive. It's fine. There's no one way to do it, but it's up to the broadcaster. So, like, let's say there's a nothing D to D pass and maybe the forward unit's getting a change. Other broadcasters might start talking about, like, somebody's hometown or some stat that they want to pull up, because the D to D pass is not integral maybe to following what's happening. I like staying on the D to D pass. Like, that's just how I call the game, and I tend to stay on the puck. I mean, I'm not on the puck like everything I say. Like, I'll give the time, I'll give the score. Sometimes if I'm working with an analyst, whether it's Phil at home or somebody on the road, like, they may jump in with something. I may say, Lightning completing a line change here if I see that's happening while the puck's behind the net. But I tend to stay on the puck. So that was one. The second was, I liked announcers who were broadcasters for the teams that I followed. So they were team announcers who were kind of okay showing lots of emotion. So I was like, well, I like that as a listener, so that's how I want to be. And I basically didn't really have any problem letting the emotion come out if it was a big play. Now, I'm less emotional if something good happens for the other team, but I'm never not going to call it as I see it. Like, I'll say if the other team does something well, I'll tell you, I just won't be as excited about it. So that's pretty much been my style or my voice, as you put it, Jake, from the get-go. I think my voice has changed a little bit from the time that I was, 19 until now. But look, if something good happens for the Lightning, I'm going to react probably the same way I would if I were watching on my sofa, and that's just, I've tried to stay true to that philosophy. And it has resonated with fans, not just Lightning fans, like in Johnstown and Hershey too. I mean, you're never going to please everybody, but the reception has been overwhelmingly positive from the fan bases that are following the teams that I'm broadcasting for. Other fan bases, maybe not so much, but that's okay because I'm not really broadcasting for them.
You had mentioned when the Lightning do something good. And this season, with a lot of changes to their lineup, you've mentioned Gensel already, the loss of Steven Stamkos in the lineup, the reacquisition of Ryan McDonough. They're still above 500. They've got the second best goal differential in their division as well. What are you seeing throughout the way that they're playing that maybe is different than last year?
Well, I would have been a lot more confident answering this question before the last two games as we're speaking. They're coming off a couple of tough losses on the road where they've given up a lot of goals and 5-on-5 goals. They've been on the wrong side of that metric in the last two games. But that was what they wanted to really work on this year. They wanted to be a better 5-on-5 team and specifically a better team defensively 5-on-5. And in winning 7 of their first 10 games, they were that. They were able to accomplish that. Their special teams were struggling a little bit, near the bottom of the league in both power play and penalty kill. But I think that they were happy with the number of goals that they were not allowing relative to last year, 5-on-5, and also their differential. Like before the last couple of games, their 5-on-5 goal differential was among the best, forget the division, in the entire league. That's 5-on-5. I think the power play, look, you can't pull Stamkos off the power play and expect the power play to just keep rolling right along. I mean, it'd been great if that would have happened. I think that they're going to find their way. The penalty kill has been a little bit more perplexing because basically they're bringing back much of the same unit that finished 5th in the league last year, except you're adding quality personnel like McDonough and Gergensons, who's been a penalty killer for much of his NHL career. So I think that that's probably like an execution issue at this point, and once they kind of start executing a little bit more consistently, hopefully that percentage will come up. But prior to the last two, I think that what I've seen from them is better defensive play 5-on-5. And they're going to need that. I mean, you can talk all you want. You can talk until you're blue in the face about needing your special teams to be good in the playoffs. And I think that that is true. But the reality is, if you cannot defend 5-on-5, it is going to be very, very hard to win 4 rounds in the playoffs, because you're going to run into a team that's going to defend really well too, and you need to match them. And you can't rely on your power play to bail you out. Like if you're going to give up 3, that's John Cooper's metric. Hold the other team to 2 or less, you give yourself a chance to win. Once it gets to 3, now you're kind of like, all right, we need to generate some offense here to maybe outscore our problems. And I like the direction the Lightning want to go. It's early in the season. They are still integrating some new people in here. 7-5 after 12 games. They'll take that. I think you both, if I would have asked you before game 1, after a dozen games, they'll have 14 points. I think most people will be like, yeah, we'll take that early in the season. So I think the early returns have been more positive than not, but clearly, like, they haven't solved the big problem yet, because they're still prone to having some games where, they're giving up too many goals and they're giving up too many chances.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it's early. It's going to take some time in those movements. It's been, I think, overall a good start. Dave, we really appreciate your time. There's so many questions that we could sit here and talk to you about. I do, before we want to wrap up, though, ask you about your book that you recently put out, The Blind Squirrel. I think it's a really awesome thing that you did, and people should definitely go check it out if they haven't seen it. But I wanted to ask you about how that idea kind of came for you. Is it's not something you typically see a lot of broadcasters do.
Well, the people who are involved in hockey who write books are usually writing nonfiction. So I'm not sure how many people wrote a novel. This is fiction. But I had the idea in the late 2000s for the story arc, started it, didn't get very far, and didn't really like what I had produced. So I put it away, got frustrated, and left it alone. And thought maybe I'll come back to it, maybe I won't. And it was 15 years. So it was looking like I wasn't. But it was on a lark. My wife suggested to me, why don't you go back to that novel you started all those years ago? And I was like, yeah, right. But I didn't go back like sitting down at the computer. I thought about the story, and the arc is this, in case people haven't heard about it or heard me talk about it or read it. So in Blind Squirrel, my protagonist is a minor league hockey player who is silently struggling with his mental health. He's had a successful career, and then he sustains an injury and is forced to retire. And it's at that point that he's able to begin the healing process. And the guy at the end of the book is in a much better place than the guy at the beginning of the book. So when I started, I thought it was going to actually, I could write hockey. Like I could write about his experience on his team and games and all of that. And I didn't really know how to execute the rest of it. So I got stuck pretty early. And I think it was when I had to start getting into the rest of it that I got stuck. So when I went back to it, I left that first part alone. And I kind of thought about the second half of the book, which is this recovery. And that's when it started to come into place. I knew he was going to meet someone. So I kind of asked myself, like, who is she? How do they meet? Why do they connect? And it was kind of the elements of the characters that allowed me to start putting the puzzle pieces together. And in the end, like, there is hockey in this book. Hockey fans, I think, will enjoy that. But I also wanted to write an accessible book. So if you don't know the first thing about hockey, I'm going to give you everything that you need to know in a storytelling sort of way, so that when Noah, my protagonist, is on the ice and there's stuff happening in a game, you can follow along. But really what it turned into was a character-driven story and a love story. There's the love between Noah and the woman he meets, but also, like, you learn about his childhood, a boy and his parents, and also, between teammates. Like, his teammates love him, right? He's a great guy. He's just carrying around this weight. So he's a guy you can cheer for. So look, it's been about 6-7 months since we published it, and the reception has been incredible. Like, it's been such a rewarding experience. You can find it online. It's on Amazon, but also, like, I've been really thankful that a lot of retailers in the Tampa Bay market are carrying the book, including the team store at Amalie Arena. So if you're at a game, you can pop in there. It's there. It's at the Pro Shop, Rinkside Sports. It's called a TGH Iceplex. So the Lightning's practice rink. I know the people there. They're like, we'll carry the book. The guy there was actually laughing. He's like, you don't know how many hockey moms come in while their kid's at another practice for like 2.5 hours. Like, I need something to do while my kid is practicing, and they pick up the book, right? They get the book. So those have been two really great retail partners, and also a lot of the independent bookstores in the Tampa Bay region have carried it as well. So thanks for asking.
Absolutely. I think it's a fantastic idea. We'll throw a link down in the description below of this video so you can check out the book if you haven't got a chance to see it. Dave, thank you so much for taking some time in your day and joining us here. We really do appreciate it. That's going to do it for us in this episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that like button and the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes just like this one. And we'll talk to you guys in the next one. Go Bolts.